The Anxious Generation: How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness by Jonathan Haidt. Introduction: The Sudden Decline. Welcome to this summary of Jonathan Haidt's The Anxious Generation. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll explore one of the most pressing questions of our time. Why are young people experiencing unprecedented rates of anxiety, depression, and mental illness? Around 2010, something changed. Across the English-speaking world, rates of anxiety and depression among adolescents began to spike dramatically, particularly among girls. Hospital admissions for self-harm doubled and even tripled in some countries. Suicide rates climbed. This wasn't a gradual trend, but a sudden shift that has left parents, educators, and mental health professionals searching for answers. Haidt argues that we're witnessing the consequences of what he calls the Great Rewiring of Childhood. Between 2010 and 2015, childhood transformed from play-based to phone-based. This wasn't just about kids spending more time on screens. It represented a fundamental restructuring of how children develop, socialize, and understand themselves and the world. Part 1. The Tidal Wave. Chapter 1. The Surge of Suffering. The statistics are startling. Between 2010 and 2015, adolescent depression rates increased by more than 50% in the United States. Among girls aged 12 to 17, rates of major depressive episodes rose from 13% to 20%. Hospital admissions for self-harm among young girls more than doubled. This wasn't happening in isolation. The same patterns appeared in Canada, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. The timing was remarkably consistent across countries, pointing to a common cause rather than local factors like school pressure or economic conditions. Importantly, this crisis primarily affected younger generations. Rates of depression and anxiety among adults remained relatively stable during this period. This was something specifically happening to those who were adolescents in the early 2010s, what Haidt calls the first generation to go through puberty with smartphones in their pockets and social media accounts in their names. The impact was particularly severe for girls. While both boys and girls experienced increases in mental health problems, the rates for girls were consistently 2 to 3 times higher. Self-harm and suicidal ideation skyrocketed among teenage girls, specifically. Chapter 2. What children need to understand. What went wrong? We must first understand what children need for healthy development. Haidt draws on decades of developmental psychology to outline the fundamental requirements of childhood. Children need extensive free play, particularly the kind of risky, unsupervised play that has largely disappeared from modern life. Through play, children learn to navigate the social world, regulate their emotions, overcome fears, and develop competence and confidence. They need strong relationships with adults and peers in their physical communities. Face-to-face interaction teaches children to read facial expressions, manage conflicts, and develop empathy. These skills cannot be fully learned through digital communication. Children also need autonomy and gradual exposure to challenges. The developmental process requires children to face difficulties, experience failure, and learn to cope with adversity. Overprotection in the physical world combined with underprotection in the digital world has created a particularly harmful combination. Finally, children need what Haidt calls embodied experiences. They need to move their bodies, experience nature, work with their hands, and engage all their senses. The increasingly virtual childhood leaves many of these developmental needs unmet. Part 2. The Decline of the Play-Based Childhood. Chapter 3. Discover Mode and the Need for Risky Play Human. Beings, like all mammals, have two distinct modes of childhood development. In discover mode, children are exploratory, curious, and playful. They learn through trial and error, taking risks and testing their limits. This mode is essential for developing competence, courage, and resilience. The alternative is defend mode, characterized by fear, vigilance, and withdrawal. While appropriate in genuinely dangerous situations, chronic activation of defend mode during childhood interferes with normal development. Throughout most of human history, children spent large portions of their time in discover mode through free play. They climbed trees, built forts, explored neighborhoods, and negotiated complex social dynamics without adult supervision. These experiences, while sometimes involving bumps and bruises, were crucial for healthy development. Beginning in the 1980s and accelerating in the 1990s, American childhood began to shift away from free play. Fearful parents, influenced by media coverage of rare but terrifying crimes, began restricting children's independence. Kids who once walked to school alone were now driven. Unsupervised outdoor play was replaced with supervised activities and structured programs. This safetyism, while well-intentioned, deprived children of the very experiences they needed to develop into capable, confident adults. By eliminating most physical risks from childhood, parents inadvertently left their children less prepared to handle the psychological and social risks they would encounter online. Chapter 4: The Decline of Free Play and Rise of Fearful Parenting. The transformation of childhood didn't happen overnight. Several factors converged to restrict children's freedom and eliminate unstructured play. Cable news networks in the 1980s and 1990s devoted extensive coverage to child abductions and murders. Cases like Adam Walsh and John Benet Ramsey, while tragic, were statistically rare. Yet the constant media attention created a perception that child abduction was epidemic, when in reality, children were safer from stranger danger than they had been in previous decades. This availability bias led parents to overestimate risks. The cases they could easily recall from news coverage seemed more common than they actually were. Meanwhile, the real risks children would soon face online were invisible and underestimated. Changes in parenting norms also played a role. By the 2000s, parents who allowed their children independence were sometimes reported to Child Protective Services for neglect. The case of the Métis family in Maryland, whose children were detained by police for walking home from a park alone, illustrates how thoroughly norms had shifted. Schools responded to these fears by restricting recess and eliminating equipment like seesaws and merry-go-rounds. Children's time became increasingly scheduled and supervised. By the early 2000s, the average American child had lost 12 hours per week of free time compared to 1981. This decline in play-based childhood left children with underdeveloped social skills, lower tolerance for risk, and less experience navigating conflicts independently. Just as these skills became more important than ever for navigating social media, young people were less prepared than any previous generation. Part 3: The Great Rewiring: How the Phone-Based Childhood Damages Girls. Chapter 5: What Makes Social Media Unique. Social media is not simply another technology or form of entertainment. It's fundamentally different from anything that came before, and these differences help explain its particular impact on adolescent development. First, social media is extraordinarily engaging, even addictive. The platforms are designed by teams of engineers specifically to maximize engagement, meaning time spent on the platform. Features like infinite scroll, pull to refresh, and algorithmically curated content create what tech insiders call the experience of flow, making it difficult to disengage. Second, social media involves social comparison on steroids. Throughout human history, people compared themselves primarily to those in their immediate community. Social media exposes users to the curated, filtered, and often misleading highlight reels of thousands or millions of others, creating impossible standards. Third, social media is performative. Users aren't simply communicating with friends. They're broadcasting to an audience and constantly monitoring the response through likes, comments, and shares. This transforms authentic social interaction into performance and metrics. Fourth, the platforms create what Haidt calls spiritual degradation. Constant posting and checking fragments attention and makes it difficult to engage in deep reading, contemplation, or sustained focus. The need for constant affirmation from others undermines the development of a stable internal sense of self. Finally, social media is particularly toxic for adolescent girls because it weaponizes their natural strengths. Girls typically excel at verbal and relational skills, but on social media, these skills are turned toward relational aggression, gossip, and exclusion that happens at scale and leaves permanent digital records. Chapter 6: Why Social Media Harms Girls More Than Boys. The gender difference in the mental health crisis is one of its most striking features. While both boys and girls have been affected, girls have suffered more severe impacts. Understanding why requires examining how social media interacts with female psychology and development. Adolescent girls are particularly sensitive to social status and peer relationships. Evolution has shaped girls to be highly attuned to social dynamics, as their ancestral survival often depended on maintaining strong social bonds. Social media takes this natural sensitivity and amplifies it to destructive levels. Girls on platforms like Instagram and TikTok face constant social comparison with impossible beauty standards. Even when they know images are filtered and edited, the emotional impact remains. Studies show that just 30 minutes on Instagram can significantly decrease body satisfaction among teenage girls. Cyberbullying affects girls more severely than boys. While boys tend toward direct physical aggression, girls engage more in relational aggression using gossip, rumor spreading, and exclusion. Social media makes these behaviors more powerful and inescapable. A rumor that once would have circulated among a small group can now reach hundreds of peers instantly. The influencer culture on platforms creates a particularly toxic environment for girls. The message that one's value depends on appearance and online popularity maps directly onto vulnerabilities that emerge during female puberty. The reward systems of likes and followers create addictive loops that are especially powerful for adolescent girls. Perhaps most importantly, social media has colonized time that girls previously spent in face-to-face friendships. In-person time with friends, which provides genuine social support and emotional development, has been largely replaced by digital interactions that are less satisfying but more addictive. Chapter 7: What is happening to boys? While girls have higher rates of internalizing disorders like anxiety and depression, boys are suffering in different ways. The phone-based childhood has also been catastrophic for boys, though the mechanisms are somewhat different. For boys, the primary culprit isn't social media, but video games and internet pornography. Both are far more immersive and compelling than the relatively simple technologies of previous generations. Modern video games are designed to be maximally engaging, offering immediate rewards, clear progression systems, and social connection through multiplayer features. The problem isn't that video games are inherently harmful. In moderation, they can develop certain skills and provide entertainment. The problem is the sheer amount of time boys now spend gaming, often at the expense of real-world activities, in-person friendships, academic engagement, and skill development. High school and college-age men are increasingly withdrawing from the real world. Rates of young men who are not working, not in school, and not looking for work have climbed steadily. Many spend the majority of their waking hours gaming. This withdrawal is correlated with increases in loneliness, depression, and failure to launch into adult responsibilities. Internet pornography represents another unprecedented influence on male development. Boys now have access to unlimited, free, extreme sexual content, beginning around age 11 or 12 on average. This exposure during crucial periods of sexual development can shape arousal patterns and expectations in ways that interfere with real-world relationships, like girls on social media, boys gaming and watching pornography are experiencing what Haidt calls experience blockers. These digital activities are so engaging that they crowd out the real-world experiences boys need for healthy development, including face-to-face friendships, physical activity, academic challenges, and romantic relationships. The result is a generation of young men who are more anxious, depressed, and lonely than previous generations, but who express these problems through withdrawal and underachievement rather than the self-harm and suicidal ideation more common among girls. Part 4. Collective Action for Healthier Childhood. Chapter 8. What governments and tech companies can do. Addressing the mental health crisis among young people requires action at multiple levels. Individual families making different choices can help, but collective action is necessary to change the environment all children grow up in. Governments can and should regulate. Social media companies more strictly. Age verification requirements could keep children under 16 off platforms designed for adults. Laws requiring platforms to limit features known to be harmful to minors, such as infinite scroll or autoplay, could reduce addictive design. Increased transparency requirements could allow independent researchers to study how platforms affect young users. Some countries have already taken action. France has banned smartphones in schools for students under 15. The UK has implemented age-appropriate design codes requiring platforms to turn off certain features for younger users. These policies show that change is possible. Tech companies themselves could implement changes voluntarily. They could end the practice of allowing children under 16 to create accounts. They could disable features like likes and follow accounts for younger users. They could eliminate algorithms that push users toward extreme content. They could build in mandatory breaks and time limits. The question isn't whether tech companies can do these things. They already employ the world's most talented engineers and have demonstrated they can implement complex features when motivated. The question is whether they will prioritize child well-being over engagement and growth. Schools and school districts can ban smartphones during the school day, not just in class, but during lunch and breaks as well. Research shows that when schools implement phone-free policies, academic performance improves, and students report feeling more connected to peers. Chapter 9. What schools can do. Schools occupy a unique position in children's lives. Changes in school policies can affect all children in a community simultaneously, eliminating the collective action problem that individual families face. The single most important step schools can take is implementing phone-free schools. This doesn't mean merely asking students to keep phones in pockets or backpacks. It means requiring students to lock phones in lockers or pouches at the beginning of the day and retrieve them at the end. Half measures don't work because the pull of the phone is too strong. Schools that have implemented true phone-free policies report remarkable improvements. Students talk to each other during breaks instead of staring at screens. Lunchrooms become louder with conversation. Teachers report that students seem more present and engaged in class. Bullying decreases because it's harder to photograph and shame peers. Schools should also increase unstructured free play and recess time. The trend toward eliminating or reducing recess has harmed children's development and well-being. Children need time to run, play, and navigate social dynamics without adult direction. Physical education and outdoor education should be strengthened rather than cut. Time spent in nature and in physical activity has profound benefits for mental health and cognitive function. These aren't luxuries, but necessities for healthy development. Schools can teach digital citizenship and healthy technology use, but these programs work far better when implemented alongside structural changes like phone-free policies. Teaching kids to moderate their phone use while allowing constant access is like teaching nutrition while running an all-day candy buffet. Finally, schools should resist pressure to push academics earlier and harder. The trend toward treating kindergarten like first grade and eliminating play in favor of worksheets runs counter to what developmental science tells us children need. Chapter 10. What parents can do. Individual parents face a difficult challenge. If their child is the only one without a smartphone or Instagram account, that child may face social isolation. This is the collective action problem at the heart of the phone-based childhood. Haidt argues for what he calls free-range parenting in the physical world and more restriction in the digital world. This means giving children more independence, autonomy, and unsupervised time in the real world while delaying and limiting their access to smartphones and social media. Specific recommendations include no smartphone before high school. Before age 14, children can use basic phones for calling and texting, but don't need internet-connected devices. No social media before 16. The companies themselves set this as the minimum age in their terms of service. Parents should enforce it. Phone-free schools, as discussed above. More independence in the physical world, including walking to school, playing outside without supervision, and running errands alone. The key is finding other families to make these commitments together. One family delaying smartphones faces resistance from their child. 10 families making the same commitment create a peer group where not having a smartphone is normal. Parents should also model healthy technology use themselves. Children. Notice when parents are constantly distracted by phones. Family dinners should be phone-free. Bedrooms should be phone-free zones for everyone. Parents should engage in activities that don't involve screens and invite children to join them. The goal isn't to shield children from technology forever. It's to allow them to move through the crucial developmental stages of childhood and early adolescence with their brains, bodies, and social skills intact, so that when they do engage with adult technologies, they're prepared to do so in healthier ways. Conclusion. Bringing up humans in a digital age. The anxious generation makes a compelling case that the mental health crisis among young people is not mysterious. We know what changed. Between 2010 and 2015, childhood was transformed from play-based to phone-based. The evidence now clearly shows this transformation has been catastrophic for young people's mental health and development. But Haidt's message is ultimately hopeful. Unlike many problems facing society, this one has clear, actionable solutions. We don't need to wait for new technologies or scientific breakthroughs. We need to return to time-tested principles of child development, free play, in-person friendship, physical activity, gradual increases in independence, and delayed exposure to adult experiences and technologies. The changes needed are simple, but not easy. They require parents to tolerate their own anxiety about physical risks while taking digital risks more seriously. They require schools to prioritize child well-being over test scores and convenience. They require governments to regulate powerful companies. They require tech companies to value ethics over growth. Most importantly, they require collective action. No single family can solve this alone. But when families, schools, and communities work together, rapid change is possible. Schools that have gone phone-free report that the transition is far easier than expected. Parents who delay smartphones together find their children are happier and more connected. The phone-based childhood is a massive experiment that has failed. We now have the data showing the damage it causes. The question is whether we have the courage and coordination to give children back the kind of childhood they need to thrive. One that happens primarily in the physical world, with real people, doing real things. Our children's future mental health and well-being depend on getting this right. The tools we need aren't new technologies or complex interventions. They're ancient and simple. Let children play. Let them take risks. Let them be bored. Let them struggle and overcome challenges. And above all, let them be children in the real world rather than performers in the digital one.